Should you learn piano like this? Or like this? Or maybe like this? Or another way entirely? Right now on Piano YouTube, you can find as many answers to this question as there are piano teachers. From classical sites like Tonebase, to jazz sites like Open Studio, to Pianote and HD Piano, and countless independent educators like me, we're all basically trying to make good use of visual teaching aids when we show our hands playing. The highlighted keys format has become super popular in recent years, but I rarely use it on this channel, and sometimes students ask me why. So I'd like to use this simple keys part by Lewis Capaldi to look at these different visual formats and how they might impact your learning. First, look at what happens if we show everything that could possibly be relevant on screen. So we could put live video of the teacher's hands or their face, highlighted keys. How about a static grand staff animated by an app? And of course, sheet music. We can also show chord symbols, maybe add in some Roman numerals. And let's add some explanatory text and maybe some other custom graphics. Now notice what happens to your attention if we take everything away and just add one thing back in. To focus is to narrow. The fewer elements we put on screen, the more deliberately we can focus your attention. In my opinion, the best way to use any teaching aid is to give the student exactly what they need for the next step in their learning. Now, this is where it gets to be a little more difficult because every student is different. So let's look at the strengths and weaknesses of these different visual formats. Highlighted keys are great for beginners learning by rote. This is how I learned my first song at the piano. My mom taught me Heart and Soul. And she wasn't trying to teach me any music theory. I don't think she even was teaching me the names of the notes. She taught me like this: look for the group of two black keys in the middle of the piano. The white key to the left of them, that's your first note. And that's exactly how I might teach someone this Lewis Capaldi song if they had never played piano before. I would say, hey, take the pinky of your right hand and put it to the left of the group of three black keys. I wouldn't assume you know this is called an F, and I might not even teach you this is called an F. We would just be going by rote memorization, getting you to a point where you can play this particular song. There are tons of song tutorials taught in exactly that style on YouTube, and you may or may not know I actually used to teach for one of them. For years, I had a job at one of the biggest song tutorial companies. And I still believe that for a certain kind of beginner student, that approach just makes sense. We're getting you playing a song that you like as quickly as possible. However, some students also want to build a musical foundation. Maybe this is you. You want a little bit more self-reliance, and you want it to get easier over time to learn more and more difficult pieces of music. One route to that kind of self-reliance is reading sheet music. So that would look like this, and I could demonstrate the song with the sheet music on screen. Of course, the funny thing about using a video tutorial to teach a song with sheet music is that you don't need the video tutorial. If you understand sheet music, you can learn straight from the sheet music. And in many ways, that's a better way to push yourself to reinforce that self-reliance using the sheet music to learn a new piece of music. However, there's great YouTube education that shows sheet music on screen for piano videos. And it's often coming from places like Tonebase, which has classical music instruction. They're not trying to teach you which notes to play. They're helping you with how to play them. That's at the essence of classical performance. Someone else has written out all the notes for you. It's assumed that you understand sheet music notation, since that's a huge part of that musical tradition. But all of the art in classical music performance comes from your interpretation and expression as a performer. So there's still a lot to be gained from watching videos that use sheet music on screen just as a reference. Another format might look like this. We're just showing you the chord symbols. So what might seem like a complex piano part becomes just 4 simple pieces of information. I love this approach because, in my view, it gets us closer to the mindset of the musician who wrote the keys part. This is actually a very simple chord progression. We've just applied some arranging tools. To go from the root position chord progression to the full keys part, we're taking the third of the chord, that middle note, and moving it up an octave. We can use that same voicing with all of those root position chords. And all we need to do is add in that rocking 8th note part in the right hand, and we have the exact keys part from the recording. Understanding theory and arranging tools like this is a great path towards self-reliance in styles of music outside of classical music that are going to ask you to improvise more and use your ear. Which, speaking of using your ear, we could also put Roman numerals on screen, and that's a good route towards developing your ear if you have relative pitch, so that eventually you could hear this keys part and recognize the chord functions, so that you don't actually need any visual aid. You could just learn it from the recording. And by the way, that's how I learned this keys part in preparation for this video. Always a good question to ask yourself when you're learning something on YouTube. How did the person on YouTube learn what they're teaching you? Now, it might feel like learning a song by ear using chord functions like this is a long way off for you, but that's absolutely something that adult students can learn to do. However, it's going to be difficult to learn that skill if you constantly rely on using highlighted key tutorials that spoon feed you every single note in a piece of music. After all, when I showed the chord progression on screen, you might have wondered, well, why not still show the highlighted keys? It just makes things way easier. I can see exactly which notes you're playing, so I don't have to puzzle out which chord tones belong to a D-flat major chord and then apply this arranging tool you're talking about. But you're missing the point. That's what I want. I want you to have to puzzle out which notes belong in a D-flat major chord and how do I turn that into the keys part that I'm hearing. It's like taking off training wheels. It's going to be harder at first. You're more likely to fall down and get a scrape, but the difficulty is an important step in your learning. And if someday you want to ride a great racing bike or maybe even a motorcycle, eventually you're going to have to take off the training wheels. So I hope it's clear. I think all of these visual formats have value as teaching aids. And if you're a teacher or a student who relies heavily on the highlighted keys format, more power to you. What I want everyone to ask themselves leaving this video is, where in my musical journey do I still need training wheels? And where might I benefit from taking them off? So if you've always learned songs by ear, but you want more sheet music literacy, maybe it's time to try learning some very simple pieces and force yourself just to learn them from the sheet music and not to use a tutorial or a recording. If you're a classical musician who's always wanted to learn to improvise, well, you might need to try improvising and making a mess and getting away from relying on sheet music. And if you want the kind of self-reliance that comes with those applied chord theory and ear training skills that I demonstrated, it may be that highlighted key piano tutorials aren't going to get you all the way there. At some point, you're going to have to push yourself to learn in a more self-reliant way, and it might be a little bit harder at first. If my teaching philosophy resonates with you, you're in luck. You can go to pianofluency.com and become a member. I have a whole learning path built out there in an online course and community specifically for students like you, where you'll build upon your musical foundation one step at a time. And whatever approach you take to your learning at the piano, I hope that it brings you a lot of joy. With that, my name is Ted with Piano Fluency. Thank you for joining me.